Johnson went onto the telly to announce what we all knew was coming, the national lockdown. On that day, there were 3,097 COVID patients in English hospitals. Today, there are 3,090, just 7 fewer. And tomorrow, we expect another announcement from Mr. Johnson. Not a national lockdown, but many more restrictions. So, are we back at square one? No. The rate of infection today is growing more slowly. We know more about this disease and how to treat it. And so, then, there's the politics. Across the North and Midlands of England, the mood has changed. The government is now coming under harder scrutiny. Scepticism hasn't morphed into outright revolt, but all around the place you can hear an increasingly mutinous muttering. Back in March, on the eve of that national lockdown, I was joined by the Communities Secretary, Robert Jenrick. As local mayors complained bitterly this morning about the government's handling of new restrictions, he's back with us again. I'm also joined this morning by Nandy, the Shadow Foreign Secretary. When she was campaigning to become the Labour leader, she said the North must be heard more clearly. Truer than ever this morning? Peter Horby, the epidemiologist and specialist in new infectious diseases, is a key government advisor. I've been asking him just how close we are to hospitals being overwhelmed this autumn. And we'll be hearing from the front line in another way. Bolton is a town which has suffered a severe lockdown and faces further measures tomorrow. I'll be talking to its council leader, David Greenhalgh. So, once again at a turning point. To review the news this morning, Geri Scott, the political editor of the Yorkshire Post, and our now award-winning health editor, congratulations to him, Hugh. Before that, on with the news and Roger Johnson.
Thank you, Andrew. Good morning. Plans for tougher coronavirus restrictions for the worst hit parts of England are due to be finalised today. Discussions between the government and local leaders will be held ahead of an expected announcement on the new rules by the Prime Minister tomorrow. Meanwhile, England's Deputy Chief Medical Officer has warned that the country is at a tipping point in what he called our national fight against COVID-19. A Scottish MP who was suspended from the SNP for taking a train from London to Glasgow after testing positive for COVID-19 has said she won't resign. In an interview with the Scottish Sun on Sunday, Margaret Ferrier said that she panicked and that the virus made her act out of character. She added that her hard work and dedication shouldn't be wiped away for an error of judgment. President Trump is no longer at risk of transmitting COVID-19, according to the White House physician. Earlier on Saturday, he delivered a speech from the White House balcony in his first public event since being hospitalised. And he told the crowd he was feeling great. But questions have been raised over the safety of the gathering after pictures showed hundreds of people packed tightly together. And UK scientists have begun testing the BCG vaccine, which is usually used to protect against tuberculosis, to see if it could help to treat COVID-19. Researchers believe that its effect on the immune system could also be used to fight coronavirus. Thousands of people will now take part in a trial led by the University of Exeter, which will test this theory. That's it from me. The next news here on BBC One is at 1 o'clock. Back to you, Andrew.
Thank you very much indeed for that. And now, as ever, to the front pages. And some big stories on the front pages today. The Sunday Telegraph has a fairly dramatic one. It says that millions of people across the Midlands and north of England will be ordered not to leave their local areas tomorrow. That won't be a house arrest, but it'll be a kind of town arrest, it suggests. And the Sunday Times has a different story saying that town halls, local authorities, are going to be given test and trace. They're going to be take control of what they call the war on virus. If that's true, that's a big admission by the government that test and trace nationally just isn't working. The Observer says the Prime Minister is betraying his red wall voters over lockdown cash. That's Rishi Sunak's package of measures, and we'll hear more about that later on as well. Sunday Mirror here, one local lockdown rule for them, ... And finally, the Sunday Express with a very different tone. This is normally the most reliably Conservative supporting, Boris Johnson supporting paper of the lot. And this morning, lockdown revolt hits Boris. We'll be talking a lot more about that. But let's also look at some of the non-London big regional front pages, because they're very important this morning as well. We've got the Yorkshire Post there. North is set for a winter of hardship, it says there. Let's turn to the Nottingham Post as well. Government has let our city down, is its story. And then the Manchester Evening News, the blistering rage of northern leaders locked out of lockdown decisions. Finally, the Sun in Scotland has got the story of Margaret Ferrier, you just heard in the news there, the SNP MP who broke the lockdown rules but refuses to resign. So an awful lot to talk about. Now, since it's really the North's day today, I say the North, it's a ridiculous phrase, but you know what I mean. Let's turn to Geri Scott of the Yorkshire Post. All of those front pages we were seeing, it wasn't surprising yesterday, I suppose, during that press conference of the northern mayors. They were all angry, they were attacking the government, but most of them, you know, they're Labour mayors, they're elected politicians, you kind of expect that. What about your own readers? What's the mood among Yorkshire Post readers, do you think, about these new lockdown measures?
Yeah, I'm really glad, Andrew, that you kind of highlighted that the North is a bit of a ridiculous thing to kind of say, but we do use it and we all use it because there are 15 million people in the North, and our readers and readers of all the regionals that you've highlighted live in completely different places, right? So there are people who would welcome stricter measures because they see that they're not being adhered to, but then there are people that live in other areas where rates are much lower that think, well, what's the fuss about? Do we really need to close our hospitality venues? We're doing okay. So I think it's a really difficult situation to talk about the North as such a massive area like that, because it's not all the same. All the rates are not the same. The reactions are not the same. And that's not to detract from the fact that we know cases are doubling twice as fast in the North than in the South. But really what the anger has been about is the communication, how this is leaked and how things are coming out. So it's not quite as simple as saying, are people supportive of the measures? It's more how they're being imposed and what support is coming with them. And that's a lot of the anger that we heard from the mayors yesterday about this new furlough in all but name and how it's not really going to help a lot of people who will be affected.
So we're some way away from rerunning the pilgrimage of grace. But at the same time, when people pick up the Sunday Telegraph this morning and read about these new restrictions on moving out of your local area, they're going to worry, they're going to wonder why newspapers know about this, but their local leaders don't.
Yeah, absolutely. And I saw someone compare it to turning the North into some kind of open prison, which I thought was quite a, interesting way to describe it. I think this has been such a common theme throughout this crisis. Local leaders throughout have been introducing test and trace first. They've been telling the government about things first. We even had the chief executive of Leeds City Council, Tom Reardon, was drafted in to get the government's test and trace system up and running in what seemed like an effort to make sure local leaders were included, but it doesn't seem to have worked. You know, in West Yorkshire, for example, leaders are saying that really, if there was proper funding for their local test and trace systems, stricter measures wouldn't be needed. They're echoing that in Newcastle. And you can see from the Manchester Evening News piece you highlighted just how furious local leaders are. They feel like they're banging their heads against a brick wall. We're hearing the same in Yorkshire and all over the north.
And Geri, a lot of those local leaders have written to MPs of all stripes from across the Midlands and the north of England, saying that they need to challenge these Rishi Sunak measures. And if the government doesn't change its mind, then they actually need to try and vote them down. Are you hearing anything about the reaction of Tory MPs to that idea?
Yeah, I am. I've spoken to a good few of our 2019 kind of former Red Wall intake. We had 9 of them in Yorkshire, and a good few of them were minded to rebel against the government if a vote was coming on this curfew next week. They're worried about how the curfew is affecting hospitality businesses. They haven't really seen the evidence that the curfew is helping either, that it's bringing rates down. But after Keir Starmer said that that Labour wouldn't be opposing the curfew, well, they're kind of shrugging their shoulders and thinking, well, what's the point then? Why should we rebel if Labour aren't going to vote against it?
Good question, Geri. Thanks for the moment very much. Turn to Hugh. I mentioned, or I picked out the Express at the beginning of that. And it's not just the front page where we see a different tone. A very interesting piece by Esther McVeigh on page 5 of the paper.
Yes, Conservative MP Esther McVeigh, former minister, setting out why she voted against the government on the extension of emergency powers and the rule of 6. She has a go at Labour for abstaining, but she goes on to set out her thinking. She argues that in some areas of the north of England, infections have carried on rising rapidly even after the new restrictions. So what's the point of doing more? Now, the government would argue, well, you need to do more because previous ones weren't working as well as they should have done. But she goes on to set out her philosophical view that this should be down to individual responsibility. We should leave it to individuals to look after themselves because livelihoods are being damaged so much by some of these measures. So it shows a strain of thinking in the Conservative Party there.
Now, you've been following this, of course, day to day, all the time. Do you think it's fair to say that there is a growing belief that the local lockdown system simply isn't working in terms of holding back the number of infections?
Well, the current system clearly is something that needs to be worked on. I think the government are acknowledging that by announcing more measures tomorrow and a simplification. I think that's been the argument. It's been so complicated. You can live in one area, just down the road there'll be different measures. Whereas if you go for a regional approach with the different tiers that we'll be getting onto, that is where you need to go, just to make it clearer for everybody, local authorities and their residents.
All right. Geri, let me turn back to you for the Daily Mirror, which has got a comparison between better off constituencies and worse off constituencies of different political stripes and in different parts of the country, he said carefully.
Yeah, so this is really interesting, isn't it? It seems to be the constituencies of some government ministers that have high rates of coronavirus infection but haven't gone into lockdown whilst other places have. So just to give you some examples, in Bolton, for example, and Calderdale, which were locked down, there were 26.78 cases per 100,000 and 35.94 kind of respectively on those. But if you look at Rishi Sunak's Richmond constituency, a Yorkshire constituency, that's had 74.45, so higher, or Robert Jenrick, who I know you're speaking to later, he had 182.16 per 100,000 people, and they've escaped these measures. So it is interesting, and it does seem to show a bit of a divide. And actually, we saw that play out locally a bit as well in Bradford, where they've been under local restrictions for ages now. They, for a little while, did a ward by ward basis situation, and in Kirklees as well, where they were lifted out if they had lower rates. But it just became so confusing for people, because who knows what council ward they live in, really. Some people don't know what constituency they live in, let alone what council ward. But I really think there's some deeper diving to be done here. I'd like to see the hospital data that goes with it, and the kind of people that live in those constituencies may be more vulnerable. You know, if you're looking at those, you've got things like poorer health outcomes, housing situations being more overcrowded, not being able to work from home, having to go to work, you might lose your job, being on zero contract. I think, you know, Richmond is an example there. So, you know,
it is a very
rural. It's rural compared to somewhere like Bradford, for example. It's
a very, very complicated picture. And underneath it all is the issue of fairness, I suppose, Hugh. The Sunday Times has a very interesting, I should say on the front page, it's also got a very interesting story we haven't mentioned, which says panicking number 10 is going to ditch Trump and wing Biden, it says, which we can talk about another day probably. But it's got a very interesting double-page spread here, hasn't it, about what's going on around the country. And it says second wave of lockdown will divide the country. And you can see those great spikes of infections all clustered around the northwest and northeast of England and in the Midlands and a little bit in the central belt of Scotland there as well.
Yes, this is setting out in graphic terms in the Sunday Times how this tiered approach might work because of different spikes in different regions of England, that you've got tier 1, which would be the lowest level, the current restrictions and no more, the rule of 6 and so on. Tier 2, something akin to what you've already got in Manchester and Newcastle and some other areas in the northwest, where you can't go into someone's house and you can't go into an indoor venue like a pub with another household. And then tier 3, which will be the toughest set of measures. It's not clear who would go into that, if anyone at this stage, where there could be a lockdown of all businesses, pubs and restaurants, with schools staying open and only essential retail staying open. So that's presumably what we're going to hear more of tomorrow.
And one final little story across this spread that struck me is that we're talking about local test and trace, taking up from the national thing, and Cumbria has handed the whole issue over to their sexual diseases unit, who are doing a much, much better job than the national government were doing.
Well, that's right, Andrew. This is the local people, officials from different areas who already go out to households to check on the development of infectious diseases like measles, other health officials being brought in to do this contact tracing, and it works very well. They're very experienced. They know how to follow up contacts of people who've been infected in their local area. So Cumbria, Barrow and Furness has been hailed as a great example of how that can be done. And other areas, other parts of the UK, where local contact tracing, shoe leather as it's known, getting out there, you know your local area, you know your local people, you're the best people to try to keep tabs on it.
It makes a lot of sense. Hugh, Geri, thanks both very much indeed for that. Very interesting today. There's really, really good stories in the Mail on Sunday, but for some reason I couldn't have it in front of me, so I apologise to them for that. And so to the weather, well, it's been quite a bit colder. You may have caught a whiff of that slightly dank, mushy, wood smoky smell that tells you winter isn't so very far away. What are we going to get next week?
A lot more of the same, actually. Staying on the cool side, Andrew, but a little bit drier. A beautiful opportunity to get out and enjoy some of that autumn colour that we're now experiencing. We've got some showers around, but most of those showers are stuck towards the coast. You can see running in off the North Sea coast and 1 or 2 down through Wales and southwest England as well. Elsewhere, the cloud well broken, some sunshine coming through, and with lighter winds than yesterday, it might well feel just that little bit more comfortable. But the temperatures are still going to read at a low level on your thermometer for this time of year. So still that wind direction coming from a northwesterly source. Top temperatures through this afternoon, perhaps peaking at only around 11 or 12 degrees along the east coast. We might see 15 or 16 with the best of the sunshine. Through this evening and overnight, cloud and rain gathers. It's going to bring some wet weather into western Scotland, Northern Ireland through the night, clouding over ahead of it. Might see some clearer skies continuing into the southeastern corner, and here low single figures to first thing on Monday morning. So Monday starts off with early morning sunshine, clouding over quickly. The rain pushes its way steadily into the north of England and down into the Midlands. Here, if that rain lingers, temperatures are really going to struggle. But we should see an improving picture across Scotland and Northern Ireland. Top temperatures on Monday only around 10 to 12 degrees. Want some drier, sunnier weather, but still on the cool side? Well, you can have that as we move through Wednesday. On Wednesday, go back to you, Andrew.
Louise, thanks so much for that. It's the kind of weather that keeps weather forecasters in business. Thanks a lot.
It does.
Now then, there's an argument at the moment that real politics is being done in the great towns and cities of the North and Midlands of England. David Greenhalgh is the Conservative leader of Bolton Council, a town that's been under some form of lockdown since July. Earlier on, I asked him what his reaction was to the news this morning that people across the North and Midlands of England may not be allowed to leave their immediate areas.
Well, clearly, I've yet to see the full detail, Andrew, on all those implications, but clearly we are a very dense conurbation. And part of the problems that we particularly experienced in Bolton has been the lack of parity. And we certainly have had, when we were in complete lockdown for 3 weeks in Bolton, we had the ridiculous situation where people could just travel literally less than half a mile to access a pub in another county. We are right on a county boundary. So I've yet to see the detail. It seems rather oppressive on the surface. But if it addresses and we have simplicity in the regulations, I don't think that will be needed. But I've yet to see the further details.
Well,
my immediate reaction is it is oppressive.
Let me ask a little more widely, because we are expecting a whole raft of new restrictions to be announced tomorrow. As the leader of the council, do you yet know what your town is going to be facing?
No, I don't. We're in discussion with government. We had a briefing as Greater Manchester leaders, chief executives and directors of public health on Friday. And we have, what I understand, to have entered into a form of dialogue. We've put our proposals in as Greater Manchester leaders, which is, I can speak personally, but it's shared by the other leaders, that we are against a lockdown as we understand it at Tier 3, which is the complete lockdown of hospitality. And our position is very clear that we feel we need to move to extra restrictions, but one that obviously protects those most vulnerable and susceptible to the virus, but one that does not continue to have an adverse effect on local businesses and our economy.
Can I ask you about the economic package from the Chancellor Rishi Sunak, who is offering people who are waiting to hear at the moment whether they're about to lose their jobs and be made unemployed 2/3 of their wages, but that money doesn't come through until the middle of November. What do you think about that?
I'm against it. I realise government's in a very difficult position, and of course we welcome any package that is brought together that helps our businesses. But our businesses in Bolton have already been closed for 3 months in hospitality lockdown. We've lost many jobs already. Many of these businesses are already on the brink. The idea that this money is only payable from the beginning of November and it could come through as late November, early December is just not good enough. And I have called and made very public demands that it has to, at the very least, these packages return to the furlough of the March lockdown. And anything less is quite frankly unacceptable. And many of these businesses will sadly go under. And we can't build back better if we've lost some of these businesses. These great independent businesses that people have put their life savings into will be lost.
A lot of people in Bolton may be feeling in sort of despair and feeling the government are no longer thinking about them properly. Is that your own view as well?
I'm urging government now to listen again. Please listen again to the voices. The North feels like they are being treated differently. We know our rates are high. We're not underestimating that. But we have to find a way through this that, as I said before, looks after the economy. We cannot throw our local economy to the wall, particularly in the North. We have to keep that going, and I urge government to respect that. They can't continue with no exit package. No exit package has been explained to me about how we then get ourselves out of these restrictions. Everyone is talking about a second wave that will only get worse.
So to sum up, your message to the government is please, please think again. But if you don't, there's going to have to be a Commons vote to make you.
Yes, and the package needs to, at the very least, return to the lockdown arrangements of furlough at the beginning of March. Why should the North be treated any different than the rest of the country was treated when we went down into the original lockdown?
Councillor Greenhalgh, thank you very much indeed for talking to us this morning.
Thank you.
Now then, the Shadow Foreign Secretary and MP for Wigan, Lisa Nandy, is listening to that in our Salford studio. Lisa Nandy, you heard there a Conservative council leader calling on the government to think again about its package and saying there would have to be a vote in the House of Commons to vote it down if they didn't. That's exactly the message that also came from people like Andy Burnham and the mayors. You'll have seen their press conference yesterday. Andy Burnham said that the financial package would, quote, surrender our residents to hardship in the run-up to Christmas and our businesses to potential failure or collapse. Do you agree with him?
I agree with Andy, and I agreed with every word that David just said. It's really hard to explain how angry people are in the north of England about what has happened, not just over the last few months, but over the last few days. I haven't felt anger like this towards the government since I was growing up here in the 1980s. People feel that they haven't just been abandoned by the government, they now feel that the government is actively working against us. The rates are still going up. We've been under lockdown restrictions, as David said. We're into our third month now of restrictions that mean that you can't go round to your parents' house, so grandparents are not seeing grandchildren, and businesses are really feeling that this is death by 1,000 cuts. He is absolutely right. It is not too late for the government to do something, but if they carry on like this, briefing out new lockdown restrictions overnight on a Thursday night and then going missing over the weekend, we haven't seen anything from the Prime Minister, and we now have people who are ringing our offices saying, have I got a job to go to tomorrow? If they don't do something quickly, they're not just going to lose control of the virus, but they're going to lose trust in what people are being told, and that is really, really serious.
Well, let me turn to what you do, and other Labour MPs are being asked to do as well, because Andy Burnham said he was asking Northern MPs of all kinds, and you are certainly a Northern MP, to use, quotes, whatever routes open to you to bring about a vote on this and then reject it. Will you be doing that?
Yes, he's absolutely right about that. The Prime Minister needs to come to the House of Commons tomorrow and make a statement. It would be incredible if he didn't after the few days that we've just had here. But we also will be looking for mechanisms to make sure that there is a vote on this in the House of Commons. What we really want, though, is the government to come forward with a package of financial support that enables people to comply with the health restrictions. People are being told that they're going to have to exist on 67% of their wages, despite not having a job to go to, but they're having to pay 100% of their rent and bills. The government has got to sort this out, because the number of people who've told me in the last few weeks that they're scared to download the app, they're scared to go for a test because of the financial implications for them and their families. These two things go absolutely hand in hand, and the government now has to listen.
So, to be absolutely clear, if they don't listen, because they have said this package is, quotes, non-negotiable and not for discussion, if they don't listen, will Labour MPs join, if they can, with Conservative rebels and try and vote it down or not?
Well, we will try and frame the terms of a vote in the House, a debate and vote in the House of Commons, so that there is an opportunity to put forward an alternative support package. The problem with just voting down what the government is proposing, as Andy Burnham and others recognised at the press conference yesterday, is that we support more restrictions coming in. We've got to get control of the virus. We support a financial package, but the financial package is not sufficient. We don't want to get rid of what the Chancellor has done. It was right that he said that there will be some help, but the help is by no means good enough. And if he doesn't think again, we will have people being evicted. We're in the middle of winter in a global pandemic. This is really not a sensible way to carry on.
But if you want them to change their minds, then you have to confront them with the possibility of actual parliamentary defeat. And I'm still unclear whether you're prepared to do that.
Well, we wouldn't vote down a support package with nothing in its place. That wouldn't be a responsible thing to do at all. But we certainly will be seeking to find a way to force a vote in the House of Commons for a better support package. And yesterday, the mayors of the city regions across the north of England also laid bare the possibility of legal action if the government doesn't back down. The government should be working with local leaders in these areas to understand what is needed. Not to do so shows utter contempt for people in the north and the Midlands, and they've got to think again.
One of the stories briefed out this morning is that people in the north may face restrictions on where they can move, not being allowed to move out of their local areas or villages or towns or whatever it is. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I mean, we've already had something akin to that already in parts of the north. In Greater Manchester, for example, when we went into lockdown at the end of July, there was a request that we didn't go and travel to places like Scotland, for example, from the SNP government there. So we have been living with this, to be honest, for quite some time. Right. We will support measures that get control of the virus. This is really, really serious now, and there are real concerns from our public health directors in the north that unless something is done right now, we're rushing into a headwind, as the Deputy Chief Medical Officer put it this morning. It would be a perfect storm. We've got to get control of it, but we need government to work with us, not against us, in order to make this happen.
David Greenhalgh this morning told me, though he hadn't seen the details to be fair, that this was an oppressive measure. He thought it was oppressive, but you don't agree with that?
Well, it is oppressive, of course it is, but it's also potentially necessary. And part of the anger here in the north of England is that it may now be necessary, but this was never inevitable. Back at the start of summer, we were urging the government to do a rapid review. The scientists did a rapid review. The Prime Minister couldn't even confirm that he'd read it. And then they had a wasted summer where they just didn't get any of the things in place that they needed to. We're still having an argument about whether the local expertise that we have, our public health expertise, is better at test, trace and isolate than Serco, Deloitte and Boots. I'm sorry, but this is just absurd that it's taken this long for the government to realise that there is enormous expertise around the country that they should be tapping into, and they've got to start listening to us.
And you want some of these restrictions to go ahead. A lot of the local leaders are saying they're very, very sceptical of, and indeed hostile to, the idea of bars and restaurants being closed in particular, and that the evidence is not at all strong that that's where the real problem of infection lies. Again, what's your reaction to that?
Well, I spoke to Andy Burnham about this yesterday. What he really wants is to understand the basis on which the government is making these decisions. I was asked to go to a briefing with the Minister on Thursday with other Northern MPs, where we were told that the transmission rates were the cause of the transmission rates was hospitality, but then the figures that they produced didn't seem to back that up. Now, I think it's probably right to say that there are going to have to be restrictions on pubs. I think that the length of time that young people spend in pubs probably is part of the driving force around this. But it is absolutely absurd that the Mayor of Greater Manchester, who is seeing very, very high transmission rates in his area, cannot get access to that data. And when we were on the call with the Minister, we were told that although we could ask questions about the science, we couldn't ask questions about the policy, so we couldn't ask them why they were bringing in particular policies. They're treating us with contempt, but more importantly, they're treating people across this country with contempt as well.
So do you think that the proposal to close bars and restaurants across the north is a good idea or a bad idea?
I think it's starting to look like that is necessary. We had a briefing with the Chief Medical Officer last week who said very clearly that he believes that this is part of the problem. And our priority is to make sure that we get control of the virus and we keep schools open. So if that is necessary in order to do it and the Chief Medical Officer recommends it, then what we need to do now is work with the government to get a package of support in place for those people affected.
So I am now badly confused because the Manchester City Council leader, Sir Richard Leese, said this week a lot of emphasis has been placed on pubs, bars and restaurants. The evidence in Manchester is that these are not major sources of transmission. Further measures risk posing an existential threat for enormous numbers of our businesses and the people who work in them. You believe in listening to the local leaders. There's a local leader saying bars and restaurants are not the problem.
Yeah, and if you're confused, Andrew, I think that goes for a lot of local leaders as well, because they have been told up to now that the reason that the transmission rates are rising, the cases are rising, is because transmission is taking place in the home. And that has been the advice coming from government, and that has been told to them in private briefings. We were told something different last week.
I'm sorry to jump in, but so in that case, why destroy all these businesses? Why close all the pubs and restaurants now if they're not the real problem?
We were told in a private briefing by the Chief Medical Officer last week that the problem that they face is that the virus has to come into the home somehow. So although households giving it to each other is the problem, but you have to make sure that the virus doesn't come into the home. Now, there are places where the virus is spreading. Pubs is one of them, which is why the government is considering closing them. But if they had shared that information early, you wouldn't have this level of confusion amongst local leaders. And that's why we've been saying they need to be far more honest and transparent.
I'm just going to jump in one more time because the Public Health England data suggests that it's workplaces, colleges and schools that are much more serious sources of transmission than pubs and restaurants. And therefore I'm confused, given that nobody is suggesting closing universities or colleges or schools, and indeed many people are being encouraged still to go back to their workplaces, why we are focusing on these particular businesses.
Well, the data that we were shown last week contradicted that. It said that pubs, hospitality was the major source of transmissions. Now, I'm not sure if that is correct, because we in Greater Manchester have data that shows that public transport, for example, alongside the other areas that you mention, are the major source of transmissions. But this just shows how absurd it is that the government hasn't shared this information, and that we've had a Prime Minister who's gone missing all weekend while these decisions are being made. We need the government to be far clearer, far more honest. We will support them to get this right, but they've got to change course.
If I was running a restaurant in Manchester, by now my head would be in my hands and I'd be muttering a plague on all their houses, because you all seem to be confused about this. Nobody is giving me clear information, not the opposition, not the government, nobody. Can I turn to one other issue which has been a source of great confusion, which is the 10 p.m. curfew. Now, we have heard that there are Conservative MPs across the north who are prepared to vote against this, but will not do so because the Labour Party has now decided to abstain. Why are you abstaining when you could be confronting the government with another area where lots of people think the science isn't there, and businesses are being, run into the ground for no particularly good reason?
Well, because it's very clear that we do need further restrictions. And actually, if you look at the example in Wales, where they've brought in a 10 p.m. curfew, but they have also staggered closing time so that people aren't tipping out onto the street at exactly the same time. Yeah. And they've closed off licences at 10 p.m. too, so that people don't then go and buy alcohol and go to each other's houses and mix. It has actually been relatively successful.
Andy Burnham said it's causing more harm than good.
Because of the way it's being implemented. And there is no confusion amongst the opposition. We've got to take measures to get control of the virus. We want to make sure those measures are workable. So we want to see the science, and we will support them with a financial package in place. I just wish the government would reappear and start to make some decisions about this and make them with us, with the north of England, not against us.
Lisa, Nandy, thanks very much indeed for joining us this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, Professor Peter Horby chairs a crucial scientific committee advising minister, the one that assesses viral threats to this country. It's known as NERVTAG. And he also runs the world's largest randomised clinical trial for potential treatments for COVID-19. Just before we came on air, I asked him if he agrees with the Deputy Chief Medical Officer that we are now at a tipping point, similar to the one that we saw back in March.
Unfortunately, I have to agree with that. The numbers are not looking good at all. We've got increasing cases, increasing hospitalisations, both in younger adults but also in the elderly, those most at risk. And we are starting to see the numbers of deaths increase as well. So it really is a rather precarious point, I'm afraid.
It's a precarious point, but of course we are also in a better situation when it comes to treatment and how much we know about the disease, presumably.
Yeah, there's a number of things that put us in a better situation. We have much better testing and tracing capabilities. We have a much better understanding of the disease. And what's great to see is that it appears that the risk of death in hospitalised patients is coming down. It was pretty high at about 25-30% in the last wave. And although the data are preliminary, it looks like it's coming down and maybe below 20%. So that's a really positive piece of news.
That is good news. But turning back to the tipping point question, Mr Van Tam has also suggested we might be close to having to cancel or delay, rather, non-urgent operations across the NHS to stop hospitals being overwhelmed this autumn. Again, what's your view?
Our critical mission really is to protect the NHS, because we can't have a situation like we did back in March where all the non-essential services were cancelled and now we have a big backlog. We really need to provide care to everybody, those with COVID and those without. The way to do that is to keep the prevalence, the number of infections down so that the hospitals can cope. We're already seeing in some parts of the north that some hospitals are starting to see the pressure. We have a doubling time of about 8 to 15 days. So it's not long before those ICU beds could be full and we could be in a really difficult situation. So I'm afraid we're going to have to make some very difficult choices and act very quickly.
You talk about difficult choices. Looking at the rate of infection, looking at what's happening in hospitals, do you think we could be facing another national lockdown?
I think that's a possibility, and we have to do what we can to avoid that at all costs. And that's why local measures are being put in place. And I understand they're difficult local decisions, but what we need to do is to control it where the incidence is the highest. And, currently that's in parts of the north, but we're seeing it increase everywhere, really. So we're going to have local measures to avoid a national lockdown again.
Does the evidence suggest that transmissions are taking place mainly in restaurants and bars at the moment?
Well, actually, it's difficult to say exactly where transmission is taking place. It's very clear that transmission is happening where there's close contact. We can see that very clearly. It's happening in households. It's also happening in the hospitality sector. It's actually quite difficult to know where somebody picked up an infection because obviously everyone lives at home, and we see high rates of transmission within homes, but we can't close homes. But we're also seeing transmissions very clearly related to hospitality sector, but also to some other industries. Mm-hmm.
OK, there's a lot of argument, as you know, about these new measures being announced tomorrow, particularly in the North and Midlands of England. Is the truth that because of what's happening, we have to accept more stringent measures now?
I think we do. I know there are people arguing for a different approach, one where we let the younger people get on with their lives because they're at low risk of severe disease and protect the elderly. But actually, that's a very, very challenging thing to do. It's very hard to identify who's at risk. It's very hard to isolate the elderly completely. There's still a need for home carers, care homes, hospitals, etc. So what we've seen work in other countries is just to bring the levels down, really to across the whole country to bring the levels down. And to do that, we're going to have to do more than we're currently doing. And we've seen that the measures that have been introduced in parts of the north have not been effective. So we really have to rethink.
One thing that's been causing lots of people, including me, I have to say, to scratch their heads a bit, is why there is such a divide just now between the north and the south. What is going on in the south of England and London that is not going on in the north? And what's the lesson we can learn from that?
I think there's two primary reasons that I think we're seeing higher case numbers in the north. One is that in the north, in the northeast, northwest, the Midlands, the numbers never really got down as low as they did in the rest of the country. So at the end of the summer, in late August, September, those parts of the countries were at a higher starting point. So there was a high number of cases in the community. And so obviously the increase happens quickly. Secondly, we saw that over the summer, the surveys were showing that the number of contacts that people were having with each other were not as low in those parts of the country as elsewhere. So those two things combined, a high number of cases and an increased or a higher rate of contacts, means that we're now seeing the consequences of that. Now, the underlying reasons for those two things are complex. It may well be related to different labour markets, housing density, deprivation, etc.
Now, you're running, I think, the largest randomised testing programme for treatments for COVID in the world at the moment. Can I ask you how much you have learned about this disease that you didn't know, perhaps, when we last talked in May?
Well, I think we've learned a lot of things. One is that anti-inflammatories work. We've shown that dexamethasone is really quite effective in patients who are severely ill, reducing deaths by about a third in those in ICU, which is really fantastic. And so we can build on that with other anti-inflammatory drugs, and we are testing those. We've seen that an antiviral drug, remdesivir, can reduce the length of hospital stay. So we now know that antiviral drugs can work in hospitalised patients. So now we've got two ways of attacking the disease. And we're also learning that I think blood clotting is a big problem in this disease. And so we're also learning that if we can tackle that, we can improve survival. So there's a number of ways now that we better understand the disease. And I think we're going to keep improving on that.
Can I ask about Regeneron, which President Trump took and announced was a cure and quite remarkable? What can you tell us about that?
Well, this class of drugs, these artificial antibodies, do look very promising. They look very good in the laboratory, and there's some emerging promising data in patients with mild COVID. But one swallow doesn't make a summer. We can't say because President Trump has recovered that it was due to that drug. What we need is proper large-scale clinical trials, and I'm pleased to say that drug Regeneron is in the recovery trial, so is going to be rolled out to hospitals across the UK as part of the trial.
Can I ask you about so-called long COVID, those unfortunate individuals who seem to have quite long-lasting neurological and breathing and other problems? How serious is it's clearly a serious problem, but how widespread is it? If you get COVID, what's your chance of getting long COVID as well, do you think?
Don't know. There is not enough data yet. We know a lot about the acute disease now, but we know very little about the longer term consequences. There are some big studies being set up, both in the UK and led from the UK internationally, that will tell us more. There are some small studies which suggest that the rate of post acute infection symptoms is very high, but we really need to do bigger and more detailed studies to understand how frequent it is, but also the causes of that and how we can manage it.
Professor Horby, thanks very much indeed for talking to us this morning. Much appreciated. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Now, one of the people tasked in government with keeping the local leaders happy is the Communities and Housing Secretary, Robert Jenrick. Mr. Jenrick, we were just hearing there that if this strategy doesn't work, we are heading towards a national lockdown. Is that right?
Well, the number of cases, as you've heard, is rising across the whole of the UK, but it is very concentrated at the moment in some places, in the northeast, the northwest, and some other cities like Nottingham. So it is right that we try to pursue a localised approach, And that's what we've been doing. And
But
those are
if
the
it
conversations
doesn't
that
work-
I've been having with local mayors and council leaders over the course of this weekend.
But if it doesn't work?
Well, none of us want to return to a blanket national lockdown. At the moment, there are very wide variations. If you're in North Norfolk today, there are 19 cases per 100,000. If you're in Manchester or Knowsley, you're seeing cases north of 600 per 100,000. So I think it is right that we do everything we can to ensure that we have a localised approach, a proportionate and localised approach. And that's what we're doing. And the next phase of that is that in addition to the simple national rules, we have a framework so there's a degree of consistency in those local lockdowns, but also that we work very closely with the local leaders to ask them, are there particular measures that they think would be effective in their communities that we could support them on and help us to really bear down on the virus in places like Merseyside?
There's a whole raft of restrictions being announced tomorrow. Are they going to include banning people in parts of the north from leaving their local areas?
Well, the Prime Minister is going to make a statement to Parliament, so I think it's right that he makes
if
clear those.
Your government has been briefing this to the papers all across the north. People want an answer to this. I ask you again, are you going to stop people leaving their local areas as part of these restrictions? Yes or no?
I'm not going to answer that. It's right that the Prime Minister informs the House of Commons what our strategy is. I've spent the weekend with the Prime Minister's advisor, Sir Edward Lister, with the Health Secretary, speaking to local council leaders, to the mayors.
Do they know
in those
the answer
places?
to my question?
We have set out proposals to them, and we're trying to co-design them with them so that things are not being done to local areas, they're being done with those communities. And I think that's the way forward if we're going to build the greatest coalition of support for further measures over what's undoubtedly going to be a difficult autumn and winter.
You see, when it comes to, for instance, Rishi Sunak's package, Joe Anderson of Liverpool says the reality is the decision has already been made. And Andy Burnham said there's no discussions to be had, it's finished. This is not discussion, this is not debate.
Well, I've had discussions with both Andy and Joe over the weekend. We're talking about ways in which we can help those councils with their own resources, with access and greater flexibility on track and trace, enabling them to do more enforcement in their communities and also to protect the most vulnerable people. But the Chancellor set out a very fair package, enabling people who are in businesses that are asked to close by law to have 2/3 of their unearned wages paid by the government, further grants of up to £3,000 which is developing and increasing with every passing week. We're also going to be making use of local councils to do contact tracing in particular, because there is clear evidence that local councils are good at that, as you'd expect.
But they want full control, and the reason they want full control, I put it to you, is the system at the moment, the national system, is simply not working. When I spoke to the Prime Minister last week and talked about his promise that 100% of results would come back from in-person testing within 24 hours. The figure then was 38%. I didn't know the latest figure is 24%. It's not working and it's visibly getting worse. And that's presumably why you're trying to hand it over to local authorities to see if they can do a better job.
Well, the local councils I've spoken to really are looking for two things. Firstly, to be supported with contact tracing. And there is real evidence that in places like Leicester, for example, mobilising local council workers to get onto the street.
They do it better, don't they?
Yeah, but I don't think we would be surprised by that. People who know their own community, particularly harder to reach communities, are bound to be better than Whitehall or national contact tracers. So we're going to be supporting them to do that. I think they also want to have more flexibility, for example, over where testing sites might be located in their community. And we've also offered them resources like the armed forces to help them to do that.
Okay.
So we're going to have the best possible working relationship between national and local government on tracing and on many other things.
Now, you mentioned the Rishi Sunak plan and you said it was generous. But if I am on a minimum wage or low paid in another way, I'm working in a bar or a restaurant in Manchester or anywhere else in the northeast, and I'm looking for, I'm going to get 2/3 of my pay. Now, as Andy Burnham said, you know, I can't then turn around to my landlord and say, I'm going to pay you 2/3 of my rent this week. And I can't turn around to whatever shop I'm going to, Tesco, and say I'm going to pay 2/3 of my grocery bill. Where is the rest of the money going to come from?
Well, nobody's suggesting that these things are easy. These are hard choices.
They're impossible.
We're in a deep recession. The national debt is rising. We can't do everything, But the Chancellor has set out a package which provides a safety net to people who undoubtedly will be very anxious this weekend. Those measures come on top of other things we've done, like increasing the generosity of universal credit, further support through the local housing allowance, and also we're giving councils further payments that they can give on a discretionary basis to people where there's real case of hardship. And also the individuals we're talking about here, many of them have been on the furlough scheme before, which was a very generous scheme by international standards. And the proposals the Chancellor set out this week do compare favourably with other countries. It is a more generous scheme than Ireland, than Italy. It's broadly comparable with what France and Germany are doing. We'll obviously keep this under review if we need to go further, but I think this does provide a fair safety net for people who, we have great sympathy with.
But if you are one of those many workers facing losing their jobs tomorrow and only having 2/3 of their income suddenly, and you have no cushion or extra money to support you, those international comparisons don't mean anything at all. David Greenhalgh, who's leader of Bolton Council, said that this is just simply insufficient and asks the government to think again, and suggests if the government doesn't think again, Tory MPs from the north, as well as opposition MPs, should join together to vote this down.
Well, I know David well. In fact, I'm speaking to him shortly after your programme. We've put in place these measures. They need to be seen in the context of everything else we've done. This country has put in place measures which compare extremely favourably with other countries. We can't do everything. Okay. There is a limit to what the state can do here, but we are trying to support these communities. We're also supporting the local councils. We've already given £4 billion to local authorities like David's in Bolton. And there's more that we're discussing over this weekend to help them to protect the most vulnerable people in society.
Well, maybe you can tell me more about that, because this scheme doesn't affect all the suppliers of the businesses who go under. So the people supplying the pubs and the restaurants, there's nothing for them at all.
Secondly, well, no, there is actually, with respect, because under the job support scheme, which the Chancellor announced 2 or 3 weeks ago, that enables businesses to provide support if they're not at their full capacity. So if workers are having to work part-time, then they're able to make use of that scheme. And we're also providing for those businesses further support through the VAT cut and the business rates holiday. So you do have to view this in the round of what is a very significant package of support for businesses and for individuals.
Well, viewing it in the round or not, this money doesn't come to people until well into November. That's more than 6 weeks. Some people have absolutely no income because of measures being taken by your government. How can those people survive during that period?
Well, that's not quite correct, because the furlough scheme, of course, continues to the end of this month. And so someone who's already in furlough...
If they're in furlough already, if they are.
Or if they were previously. So if they'd previously been an employee who was registered on furlough, then the company could put them back into furlough to the end of this month and then make use of the Chancellor's job support scheme. And remember, the job support scheme, when it was announced, was strongly supported by the TUC, by the CBI, by the devolved administrations like Nicola Sturgeon, for example. So this is a good package. Of course, we could always do more, but we can't support every person and every business in this country, much as though we'd want to.
Candidly, you're probably going to have to do more in this case. We'll wait and see. Now, all of this is based on a real crackdown on bars and pubs and restaurants, the hospitality sector. Do you have conclusive evidence that that's where the problem of infection really lies?
Well, it's common sense that the places where we interact the most are playing a role in spreading a virus that thrives on human interaction. And so
common sense is not conclusive scientific evidence, is it?
Going into pubs and bars and cafes and restaurants does play a role. I don't want to overstate that. There are other settings as well, like going to school, like going to workplaces. The Prime Minister has chosen to prioritise keeping education open, and where possible, to prioritise keeping workplaces open. That's a difficult choice. It's a balanced judgment, but I think it's the right one. If we can reduce the rate of infection in other settings, then it's right that we do that.
Sure. So you think there's a problem, but you're not absolutely sure. If this doesn't work, will you close colleges and schools?
That's not our intention.
I know it's not, but I'm saying if this doesn't work, what happens next?
Well, we are very clear that we want to keep education open. I think it was it had such a profound impact upon the life chances of children when we closed schools earlier this year. I'm a father of 3 children.
But we know
learning from home is no substitute for face-to-face teaching in the classroom. So we will do everything we can to keep them open.
We know that colleges and universities are absolute hotbeds of the infection at the moment. And a lot of people looking at this situation can't see what the government's route out of this is.
Well, we don't have any plan to close universities. We're obviously working closely with them so they can put in measures like keeping young people in bubbles, like trying to make campuses a more shielded environment, like ensuring there's more testing on campus. All those things are the right thing to do. But there are no easy choices here. The trade-offs are very difficult. We're making a balanced judgment that it's best to keep education and employment open. That does come at a cost to other aspects of society.
The anger in the north, which I'm sure you recognise, comes from a sense of one law for you and one law for us. And in that context, the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, was seen by other MPs drinking in a House of Commons bar after the 10 p.m. curfew. What's your response? He's denied it. What's your response?
Well, the Health Secretary has put out a statement, and I've seen corroboration from other people who were present to say that he didn't go back to the bar after 10 p.m. I obviously wasn't there, but I have seen a number of people, reliable people, who've said that that's completely untrue.
Well, let's turn to...
If I may say, just point out one point. You say that there's anger in the north, but the measures that we're bringing in here are universal. These apply across the whole of the United Kingdom, and there is nothing that we would ever do that penalises one part of the country over another. The Chancellor represents North Yorkshire. I represent North Nottinghamshire. Neither of us would want to do anything that hurts the North or the Midlands more than any part of the country. But it is right that we take a localised approach when the rate of infection is so much higher in some of those places, including Nottinghamshire, where I represent, than in other parts of the country where it's comparatively low.
I'm glad you mentioned Nottinghamshire, because in yesterday's Times, your constituency of Newark, it was reported, was awarded £25 million in funding from your own department in an initiative called the New Towns Fund. Is that right?
That's correct.
That's correct. Now, this fund was designed to help left-behind towns. That's also correct.
That's right. This is part of our commitment as a government to levelling up all parts of the country, particularly investing in towns that have been undervalued or underinvested in for too long, many of which are in the Midlands or the North, including places like Nottinghamshire, of course, where there are many places that have been deprived, ex-mining communities like the one that I represent.
And your department listed those, on an index of deprivation, the communities who are most likely to get this money. And there was 101 towns who were going to get the money. Where did Newark fit on that list?
Well, the department put in place a robust and fair methodology. It was actually designed before I became Secretary of State, and that looked at a number of factors, not just deprivation. And out of that list, we chose, on the advice of civil servants, the 40 most high-ranking towns in the country. And then in addition to that, places were chosen, again on the advice of civil servants, so that there was a broad range of places from market towns, like the one I represent, ex-agricultural towns, coastal towns, city centres, and ex-mining and coalfield communities. And that process has been set out by civil servants in my department. If your question, I think you're coming to, is was I involved in selecting my own community? Absolutely not. Ministers don't get involved in their own constituencies. That decision was made by another minister in my department.
Which minister, by the way?
It was made by Jake Berry, who then was...
Right, who also got money for his constituency.
I think, that was the decision made by another minister. Well, it was made by myself, but I think, to be honest...
So you decided that Jake Berry's constituency got money, and Jake Berry decided that your constituency
Andrew, with respect,
got money.
This is perfectly normal. Ministers do not get involved in making decisions for their own constituencies, but neither should their constituencies be victims of the fact that they happen to be a minister. This has been set out very clearly by the NAO. And what's really happening here is this is a distraction tactic by the Labour Party, who don't like the fact that we're making good on our manifesto pledge to actually invest in places which they neglected for far too long.
So there is an index, a list of deprivation. 101 is the number that you have to reach in that to get to get the money. But
that's not correct.
270.
No, that's
not 101.
That's not. With respect, Andrew, that's not correct. You should read the report set out by the department and the NAO.
Well, I've read the NAO
There was
report.
A range of different factors taken into account, and it wasn't my decision whether my constituency was given the funding or not, but my constituency was the 16th ranked town in the East Midlands, and in the East Midlands, the government gave funding to 19 towns.
Very briefly.
So that was the important factor.
At the end of all of this, you joined a group of councillors to lobby your own department to get this money, didn't you? You were part of the lobby, which seems very, very strange. So Robert Jenrick is lobbying Robert Jenrick. And unsurprisingly, Robert Jenrick's constituency gets the money.
That's completely untrue. I mean, ministers obviously have to support projects in their own constituency because we're also constituency MPs. That's the good thing about our system in this country. And it would be quite wrong if you weren't able to support your own constituency to get a school, to have a hospital, to get investment for deprived communities. And with respect, I think the Labour Party's front bench need to get out of the M25 and see what's happening in our towns and communities.
All right. Robert Jenrick, thanks very much indeed for coming in today. Thanks to all my guests today, and of course to you for watching. I will be back here again at 9 a.m. on BBC One next week. But until then, goodbye.